Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are tackling a really fascinating topic. We're going to be taking a deep dive into China's rise as a global superpower.
It's a huge topic.
It is. It really is. We'll be exploring their economic transformation, their political influence, and some of the challenges that they face along the way.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
There really is. So to guide us through this complex landscape, we're going to be looking at an academic analysis titled China's Rise, a multifaceted analysis. And
Catchy?
yeah, and very apt as well. This is a country that went from struggling to feed its people to becoming the world's second largest economy.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable when you think about it.
It really is. All in just a few decades.
Yeah.
I mean, that's got to be one of the fastest transformations in modern history.
Oh, absolutely. It really challenges our understanding of how quickly economies can grow and shift the global balance of power.
Right. So let's sort of rewind the clock a bit. Our source takes us all the way back to 1949 when the People's Republic of China was established.
What was the economic landscape like in those early years? Paint us a picture.
Well, those early decades were definitely a time of struggle.
Yeah.
The socialist model that they adopted initially faced some pretty serious hurdles.
I see.
Like the Great Leap Forward. That was an attempt to rapidly industrialize the country.
Yeah.
But it actually led to like a sharp decline in their GDP.
Wow. So it kind of backfired.
Yeah, it did. It turned out that a closed economy and centralized planning weren't really the magic bullet that they were hoping for.
Right. So it wasn't the shortcut they were looking for.
Exactly. And then the Cultural Revolution came along and compounded their economic difficulties.
Oh, wow. So they really had a rough start.
Yeah, it was a tough period for sure.
So was there a sense at that time that things might not turn around? I mean, were people getting pretty discouraged?
Well, I think there was definitely a real sense of urgency. Like they needed to find a new path forward.
Right.
And that's where 1978 comes in.
Okay.
A pivotal year in China's economic journey.
Okay, so what happened in 1978?
Well, that's when Deng Xiaoping came to power.
Oh, yeah.
And he introduced this series of economic reforms that completely changed the game.
Okay, so these reforms seem to be the big turning point. What was so different about them? Did they just completely unkin socialism?
Not really. It was more like they were trying to strike a balance. They opened up to foreign trade and investment, which was a huge change.
Right.
They relaxed some of those strict state controls and allowed for more flexibility in production and pricing.
Oh, wow. So they were kind of experimenting with different approaches.
Yeah, in a way, they were creating a mixed economy, blending elements of socialism with like market forces.
Okay, so they weren't throwing the baby out with the bathwater?
Exactly. They were trying to find a system that worked for them.
So was there a risk with this new approach? I mean, giving up some of that control could have backfired. Right?
Oh, absolutely. It was definitely a gamble. I mean, who knew how it would turn out?
Right.
But it turned out to be a brilliant gamble.
Okay, so what happened?
Well, by tapping into individual incentives while still maintaining that overall government control,
Right.
they were able to unlock like this incredible economic potential.
Interesting. So they found a way to make both systems work together.
Yeah, it was a delicate balancing act, but they managed to pull it off.
Do you have an example of how this played out in practice?
Sure. Let's take agriculture, for example.
Okay.
They introduced a system of contracts in agriculture, which basically incentivized farmers to produce more.
Okay, so how did that work?
So basically, farmers were guaranteed a certain price for their crops, which gave them more security and encouraged them to invest in their farms.
So they knew they wouldn't lose money if the market price dropped.
Exactly. And the results were incredible. Agricultural output just soared.
That's a great example of how specific policy changes can have a ripple effect.
It really highlights the importance of getting those incentives right.
And it sounds like they found a formula that worked.
Yeah, I mean, the results speak for themselves. China's GDP growth has averaged over 9% per year since these reforms were introduced.
That's just phenomenal progress, and I imagine that had a huge impact on people's lives.
Absolutely. It lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty.
Wow, so we are talking about a dramatic improvement in living standards for a huge number of people.
Yeah, it was a game changer for China.
But was it all smooth sailing from there? Were there any sort of unintended consequences to this rapid growth?
Well, one of the downsides was a widening gap between the rich and the poor.
Okay, so even though many people benefited, not everyone shared equally in that prosperity.
Right. While the reforms undoubtedly improved the lives of many, not everyone benefited equally.
So they created new social and economic challenges that China is still grappling with today.
Exactly. It's a reminder that economic growth doesn't always translate into shared prosperity for everyone.
Yeah. That's a really important point.
It's a complex issue with no easy solutions.
So it's this sort of complex picture of incredible economic success, but also growing pains along the way.
It's a story of progress and challenges, like most economic transformations.
And this rapid growth also propelled China onto the global stage, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that's where things get even more interesting.
I bet. So how did China's newfound economic power translate into global influence? We'll dig into that right after the break, so stay with us.
Yeah, so China, they're no longer just this economic powerhouse. They've actually become a major player in global politics.
Right, and they're not shy about exercising that influence, are they?
Not at all. They're really making their presence felt on the world stage.
So how are they doing that? Is it all about economic clout, or are they using other strategies as well?
Well, it's definitely a multi-pronged approach. I mean, they're actively involved in all these international organizations, like the World Bank, the IMF, the WTO.
Yeah, just the big players.
Right. But what's really interesting is their approach to global leadership.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
It's almost like, it's ambivalent.
Ambivalent. That's an interesting word to use. What do you mean?
Well, they're definitely eager to have a seat at the table,
Right, to be taken seriously.
Exactly. And they want to exert their influence, but at the same time, they seem hesitant to fully embrace those responsibilities that you usually associate with, being a developed nation.
Okay, so they want the power, but not necessarily all the baggage that comes with it.
Yeah, kind of. It's like they're trying to rewrite the rules of the game rather than just playing by the existing ones.
So are they trying to create a whole new world order, or are they just being strategic about how they use their power?
I think it's probably a bit of both.
Okay, so can you give us an example of how they're being strategic?
Sure. Take the UN, for example.
Yeah.
They're actually at the helm of 4 UN specialized agencies.
Wow, that's pretty significant. Which ones?
Well, they're setting standards in key areas like, telecommunications and agriculture.
So they're really targeting those sectors where they can have a global impact?
Exactly. They're shaping global norms and standards in those areas.
That's a smart move.
And then you have, of course, the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI as it's often called.
Yeah, that's been in the news a lot. What exactly is it, and why is it so important?
Well, it's this massive infrastructure project, basically, connecting Asia, Africa, and Europe through, networks of roads, railways, ports, pipelines.
Wow, it sounds enormous.
It is. It's absolutely staggering in scope. We're talking about over 130 countries involved, and it's impacting a huge chunk of the global population and the global economy.
So they're literally reshaping global trade and connectivity.
Yeah, they're thinking big picture, long-term strategy.
And how does this tie into their approach to global governance?
Well, it's a key part of it. They're supporting institutions that align with their interests and challenging those that don't. It's all very deliberate and calculated.
So they're playing the long game.
Absolutely. They're thinking decades ahead.
So what does this all mean for the existing world order? Is China's rise a threat or an opportunity or something else entirely? It's the big question, isn't it? I mean, China's a rising power. There's no doubt about that.
Right.
But how they choose to wield that power, well, that remains to be seen.
It's certainly a fascinating and complex situation.
There's no easy answers.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about technology. China has made some remarkable advancements in this area, right?
Oh, absolutely. They've become a global leader in fields like 5G, AI, renewable energy.
They're really pushing the boundaries.
They are. And they're not just catching up to the competition, they're often surpassing it.
Yeah, their technological leapfrogging has been pretty amazing to watch.
It really has. And it's happening at an incredible pace. Did you know that China now accounts for 40% of global patent applications?
Wow, 40%. That's more than double the United States.
It is. It's mind-blowing, really.
So what's driving this technological surge? What's the secret sauce?
Well, for one thing, they've been pouring massive amounts of money into research and development.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that. Like, a significant portion of their GDP goes towards innovation. Right. They're really committed to it. And the government has been heavily involved, too, with programs like, Made in China 2025.
Yeah, I've read about that. It's designed to make them a leader in key technologies.
Exactly. And then you have the rise of all these homegrown tech giants like Huawei and Tencent.
Right. They're now competing on a global scale.
They are. And they're not just competing, they're often winning.
It's amazing how quickly they've gone from being a technological follower to a leader.
Yeah, it's been a remarkable transformation.
So what does this mean for the rest of the world? How is China's technological dominance going to impact us?
Well, it's going to have a profound impact on all of us, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. The phone in your pocket, the apps you use, the energy that powers your home.
Yeah, all that stuff we take for granted.
Exactly. All of that could increasingly be influenced by Chinese innovation.
It's a good point. We often don't think about where these technologies come from.
Right. But the fact that China is playing such a dominant role in their development, well, it's something we should all be paying attention to.
Agreed. It's not just about the technologies themselves, it's about the economic and geopolitical power that comes with controlling them.
Right. It's a whole new game.
Speaking of economic power, earlier we were talking about China's remarkable growth. But our source also mentions that they're facing some headwinds. What are some of the challenges they're up against?
Well, no economy can grow indefinitely without hitting some bumps along the way.
Right. What goes up must come down.
Exactly. And China is no exception. They're facing a number of challenges, both internal and external.
Like what are some of the big ones?
Well, one of the big ones is the slowdown in the property market. It's been a major engine of growth for China for a long time.
So is that bubble finally bursting?
It's definitely slowing down. And consumer spending has been weaker than expected, too. Plus, there are concerns about rising youth unemployment.
Oh, wow. So it sounds like they're dealing with some of the classic growing pains of a maturing economy.
They are. And then there are the environmental costs of their rapid industrialization, which are becoming increasingly difficult to ignore.
Yeah, those are huge issues.
They are. China faces serious problems with air and water pollution, desertification, soil erosion.
I mean, we're talking about the world's largest carbon emitter here.
We are. These are not just local problems anymore. They have global implications.
It's a reminder that even the most impressive economic achievements can have a dark side.
They do. And it's a side that we can't afford to ignore.
And on top of all that, they're dealing with an aging population and a shrinking workforce.
Right. So that's going to put a strain on their economy and their social safety net in the years to come.
It sounds like they've got a lot on their plate.
They do. It's going to be interesting to see how they navigate all these challenges.
So how is the rest of the world reacting to all of this? Is there like a consensus on how to engage with China?
Not really. I mean, there's a whole spectrum of perspectives on China's rise, ranging from, cautious optimism to outright fear.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's a pretty polarizing topic.
It is. And it's important to understand all these different viewpoints if we want to make sense of what's happening.
Okay, so what are some of the key perspectives we should be aware of?
Well, you have the cautious view from the West, which basically sees China's rise as a potential challenge to the existing global order.
Okay, so they're a bit wary.
They are. And there's concern that China's economic and political system is just fundamentally incompatible with Western values.
So they see it as a clash of civilizations.
Yeah, in a way. And then you have the perspective from many Asian nations, which is a bit more nuanced.
How so?
Or they acknowledge both the benefits and the anxieties associated with China's growing influence.
So it's a mixed bag.
It is. They welcome the economic opportunities, but they're also wary of becoming too dependent on China or being drawn into its sphere of influence.
So it's a delicate balancing act for them.
It is. They're trying to find a way to benefit from China's rise without compromising their own sovereignty.
Right, makes sense. And what about China's own view of its place in the world? How do they see themselves?
Well, China sees its rise as a peaceful return to its historical prominence. They emphasize cooperation and seek recognition as an equal partner in the international order.
So they want a seat at the table, but not to dominate it.
Exactly. They believe that their economic success is a model for other developing countries, and that their system of governance is well suited to the challenges of the 21st century.
Interesting. It's a very different perspective from the West.
It is. And it's important to understand those differences if we want to avoid conflict and build a more stable and prosperous world.
I totally agree. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, and it's clear that China's rise is a story with many chapters yet to be written.
It's a story that's still unfolding, and it's one that we'll all be watching closely.
For sure. It's a fascinating and complex topic, and one that we could easily spend hours discussing. But for now, we need to wrap things up. But before we go, I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into China's rise.
It's been a pleasure. Always happy to talk about this stuff.
It's been a great conversation. And to our listeners, we hope you found this episode insightful and engaging. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
And don't forget to check out the show notes for links to all the sources we used today.
That's right. Thanks for listening. It's clear that China's rise is a story with many chapters yet to be written. We've covered a lot of ground today, from their incredible economic transformation to, their growing global influence and the challenges they're facing along the way. But I think what really strikes me is just how many different perspectives there are on what it all means.
Yeah, it's definitely a reminder that there's no single narrative when it comes to China. We need to be wary of easy answers or simplistic explanations. The reality is much more complex and nuanced than that.
Right, and it makes you realize that this isn't just some abstract geopolitical event playing out on the world stage. China's choices actually have very real consequences for all of us.
They do. Whether we realize it or not.
Whether we realize it or not, exactly.
Think about it. Like the clothes you wear, the food you eat, even the technology you use.
Yeah.
So much of it is connected to China in some way. And as China continues to rise, well, that interconnectedness is only going to deepen.
It really makes you think. So what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with today? If they could only remember one thing from this deep dive, what would it be?
I think the most important thing to remember is that China's rise is a multifaceted phenomenon.
Right.
There are no easy answers, no simple explanations.
Right.
It's a story of remarkable achievements, but also complex challenges. And the outcomes are uncertain. It's a story that's still being written.
I love that. A story that's still being written. That's a great way to put it. It reminds us that this is an ongoing process and we're all part of it in some way.
We are.
So what can our listeners do to stay informed and, engaged with this story as it continues to evolve?
I always encourage people to go beyond just the headlines, dig a little deeper. Read articles from a variety of sources. Explore those different perspectives.
It's so important.
It is. And don't be afraid to challenge your own assumptions.
Right. Be open to new ideas.
Exactly. And there are so many resources out there to help you learn more. The show notes have links to all the sources that we use today.
Right.
And there's a wealth of information available online and in libraries.
It's all about staying curious and informed. Because China's rise is one of the most consequential developments of our time, wouldn't you say?
I would agree with that. Absolutely. And its impact will be felt for generations to come.
It's a global game changer.
It is. And it's one that we all need to understand better.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we'll leave you with a final thought to ponder. As China navigates this complex and ever-changing landscape,
right,
what role will it play in shaping your future?
It's a question worth reflecting on. And a question that only time will truly answer.
I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Thanks for having me. It's been a great conversation.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.